This is React Wednesdays. React Wednesdays is actually a show Dan and I do every week here on Twitch, here on the Code It Live channel. Actually, I'll go back in here. If you just Google React Wednesdays, you can find us. Usually we're about at our normal time slots. It's because it's usually 1 Eastern that we do. And today we're doing something special. We're inviting some people in and kind of doing it all day. We drank a lot of coffee to sit through this, but this has been a lot of fun. But with that in mind, I want to bring in our next guest. I see him backstage here, and welcome in Kent C.Dodds to the stream. Kent, man, how's it going?
How's it going?
Good. How are you? You should introduce yourself for the maybe 2 people here who have not heard of you or know what you do and that sort of stuff.
I'm sure there are plenty of people who haven't heard of me. But I'm Kent C.Dodds. I'm a software engineer. I'm a full-time teacher, so I teach people primarily JavaScript and React stuff. And before that, about 2.5 years ago, I left PayPal. I was there for 3 years and then a couple other companies before then. And I'm an open source person. And I do, I'm a GDE. Feel like, and I live in Utah. With my wife and 4 kids and 1 dog. And I created epicreact.dev. So if you want to go learn about React, and also testingjavascript.com. So if you want to learn about either of those things, you can go take a look at those.
I think one of the fun thing is between our guests, we own a lot of like very unique and fun URLs. Like we got a lot of the React namespaces covered.
Yeah.
Network Solutions has to make a buck.
Yeah. So we wanted to talk testing library today. And I think my first question for you is like, where did the idea behind testing library come? I'm actually curious about like if there's an origin story behind the name as well.
You know what? Let me see if in my introduction to testing library.
And if it makes sense to just dive right in, let's just do it.
Yeah, here, let me share my screen. And
this may be the very first use of emojis in StreamYard username history. I'm impressed.
What a shame.
You crushed it again.
Yeah. So the rocket is for Epic React and the trophy is for testing JavaScript.
And they have meanings, even better.
Yeah, that's right. And the GOAT is for React Testing Library. And there's the origin story for that is I just picked a random emoji. But this is the introduction blog post. And years ago, let's see, 2018, I was preparing for a workshop I was giving actually with Ryan Florence, his workshop.me. Some folks might remember that. He did that for about a year. I was going to Trulia to give a testing workshop. And I'd already given a testing workshop at Assert.js, or I think one was before the other. I can't remember. In any case, I was giving some testing workshops. And the way that I like to teach testing is I like to start with, here's the thing with, or the way I like to teach anything is, here's the thing without the abstraction. Now let's add the abstraction so we don't have to do all this junk. And so the jump between doing stuff without the abstraction to Enzyme, which was at the time the standard library for testing React, that jump was really big. And in addition, I was starting to prepare a document that had all of the things you should not do with Enzyme. And it was a very long list of things you shouldn't do with Enzyme. And the things that, frankly, in the Enzyme documentation, as well as in the issues and stuff, the Enzyme maintainers were encouraging people to do. So I would have to like constantly defend myself and say, hey, I know what the Enzyme maintainers are saying, but they're wrong. Don't use these APIs. And so I was just wrestling with myself in preparing this workshop. And I looked at my before Enzyme exercise where it's like, here's how you do it just with React DOM. And I thought, you know what? That's actually pretty great. Let's just stick with that. We don't need the abstraction. And of course, eventually you get to a point where you've built enough testing utilities that you want to abstract that out more efficiently. And that's where React Testing Library came from. So I built it in about a week or so, and decided that it was good enough that I could I could teach people this when they're paying me lots of money to learn how to test. It's like, use my new library, and that's how you test your React stuff. And that's where React Testing Library came from. I don't know if I have the origin story for the name, but basically around this time, I tweeted that I had an idea for my new React Testing Library name, or I had an idea for the name of my new React Testing Library. And my idea was the React TA, which would be the React Testing Assistant. That was my idea that I was kind of subtly tweeting about. And Ryan Florence, quickly after my tweet, responded with, "What is it, React Testing Library?" And I was like, yes, that's what it is. So I grabbed that on NPM, and yeah, so that's where the name React Testing Library came from, was just Ryan's brilliant suggestion.
There are harder ways to come up with names.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, it's descriptive. I feel like after state management and hearing people say like, what is Zustand and Jotai, which there's nothing wrong with creative names, like absolutely. But there is something to be said about, you hear a name and you know exactly what that thing does.
Yeah.
If you want to modernize it, just drop a couple vowels, add .io at the end, and there you go. There's 2.0.
Yeah. Yeah, I there are some people who really don't like descriptive names. I really do. I think they're nice. So yeah, React Testing Library is the thing. And now the React portion of React Testing Library was so small that I thought, the most of this is just like DOM stuff. And so I extracted that out into DOM Testing Library, and then just had React had like a React build on top of that with a couple of utilities that are React specific. And then it's like, oh, okay, so now we can use these abstractions to test anything that has a DOM. And so React Testing Library is slowly becoming the de facto standard, testing library is becoming the de facto standard for Vue testing. It's a lot of people in the Angular community are using Angular Testing Library. A lot of people use it for Cypress tests, and in fact, the maintainers of Cypress have said that it's a great abstraction that they recommend people add. And so, yeah, anywhere you can find a DOM, and like you've got Puppeteer and Playwright, they have implementations as well. So yeah, anywhere you can find a DOM, you can test it with the utilities from Testing Library.
That's exciting progress in 3 years.
Yeah, it's been great. And the thing that I was tracking for a long time, actually, it auto completes in my browser, was download comparison between Testing Library and Enzyme. And I think it was about a year ago that we passed them, and that was there was not a little satisfaction out of that. And it's not a competition really, but what this indicates to me is that we're moving in the right direction. Because honestly, I wouldn't have built Testing Library if I thought Enzyme was good or good enough for what the community needs. But it's not. And so I'm glad to see that people are turning around. And it looks like Enzyme has started to peak maybe right around here. So that's good. It's a good thing because I think people get more out of testing with React Testing Library. So
very cool. Well, do you want to start like showing people what it is, what it does, that sort of thing?
Yeah, totally. So what I was thinking is, in Epic React, we have this testing workshop. And I've got all the material. It's open source on GitHub. In fact, let me give you a link to that material. It's on github.com/C.Dodds/testing React apps. And I don't have the Twitch stream open right now, so you'll have to give that to them. But
Yep.
yeah, so it's all totally open source. You can go through this material yourself. But I was thinking I'd just kind of go through some of this material, and you can grab me at different spots, whatever you want to learn about and talk about, and we can just, you can interrupt me and we can answer whatever questions people have. So
I like that plan.
cool. So this is a pretty basic UI. It's always nice to start with something simple that everybody understands. And yeah, it's just increment and decrement. And so if you really had a UI like this, the way that I think about testing is that the entire point of testing is to give yourself confidence. Some people use testing to enhance their workflow, and that's great. I'm not in the business of enhancing people's workflows. I'm in the business of giving people confidence. And the fact is, you can do both with React Testing Library. But when I talk about the purpose of testing, it's 100% to give you confidence that you can ship your app without having to manually check everything. Or even if you do manually check stuff, that's called testing too. So before we had automated testing, we just manually did stuff. So we'd open up our component or our page and we'd click this and say, yep, it can increment, it can decrement, check that off, and now we can ship. But pretty soon you have millions of counters all over your app and they all interact with each other. And maybe they're not counters, maybe there's something more practical. But the fact is that as your app grows, it just becomes untenable to manually test all of this stuff. And so what do? Well, you want to automate some of that. Like software, the entire purpose of software is to automate things so that we can get more done. And there are some things that we simply could not do if we didn't have computers to do them for us, right? And so when we run it against a problem with doing things manually, that's when we think, okay, I bet I could use software to do this. And that's what tests are. Tests are just the idea behind automating our process of creation of testing. So,
Ken, I find it in the world today, there's always still a fight with people wanting to adopt testing and also not wanting to adopt testing because they don't really understand what you said. And the key word there is confidence. You can gain confidence, and the time back is great, but the confidence is really something that can't be understated. I took over an MVC framework a long time ago, and it took me a couple of months of releases before I actually would believe the tests. But if it was all green, we'd push it and there'd be no drama. And it's like, I kind of felt like I had more I needed to do on my own to validate, but I didn't. It was just done. And, that gap, someone who might think they want to start testing and isn't sure, if they could just get that confidence reality, experience that, they would totally be into it. Can you just kind of speak to that inertia that maybe someone's just not ready to start today? Like what might get them over the hump?
Yeah, I actually, I have a blog post for that. Is a phrase I say a lot because I have a lot of blog posts. I'm at 180 blog posts and I tried to make them all pretty useful. But I have a lot of blog posts on testing. There are 43 of these. And yeah, so the blog post that I'm thinking about is, should I write a test or fix a bug? Where I talk about how you decide what to spend your time on. And actually next week, there's a remote conference called Front End Test Fest. And I'm giving a talk there. I'm the closing keynote about, the talk is titled Practically Testing. Where we want to be practical about how we think about testing. It works really well for that audience because people who are going to a front-end test fest are probably the ones who are gung-ho about testing. And so the purpose of the talk is kind of like pump the brakes a little bit. Let's make sure that everything that we're doing here is worthwhile. But the inverse is also true. Like it's important to recognize that you can either write tests for this stuff or you can wait until it breaks in production and then fix that. And I can't give you the right answer for for that. Like it doesn't. There's no right answer for everybody. Maybe it's okay to wait until it breaks in production and fix it, and then just don't test it ever. Just really depends on your context. But for most people, that's probably not the case. But yeah, I think in general, for most people, they don't want to have to wake up at 2 a.m. because there's a production problem, and we can catch those sorts of things through automated tests. Like for me, when I got started into testing, it was in my open source stuff because I kept on making changes to my libraries, and I didn't want to have to pull up the page where I had this library rendered and click around and check everything every time I made a change. And so that's when I got into testing. Was I thought, like, this just does not scale. I can't get as much done when I don't have
I
tests.
only had a robot.
Yeah, exactly. I call my tests little Kents. I've got 1,000 little Kents going around making sure everything's good, and they're faster than I am. And when I was at another company, I guess I won't name them, before they really had much of a test suite, every 2 weeks or so, we would release, and the entire day, everybody at the company was dedicated to manually testing everything. And it was just the worst. And so what I did, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one, is I would go through and follow the steps that I was supposed to do. And if the test failed, like something didn't happen right, it was for a couple of reasons. Maybe the test was out of date, or maybe there really was a fluke of some kind. And I would just chalk it up to one of those. I just like, it probably doesn't matter, because if it really is a test failure, then I have to like log it and I have to track it and I have to do all this extra stuff. I don't want to do that. I would just want to get back to my work. And so, yeah, there's more than one time that I just like, that probably was just a fluke, or I'm pretty sure they changed that feature. They just haven't updated the test.
Yeah, well, that also gets into writing quality tests, because I've also had test suites like that like are so flaky that if you don't trust them, they're almost worthless too. Because even if it's automated, if you don't trust a failing test, why do you even have it?
Yeah. In fact, they're literally worth less. They're worth less than having no tests at all.
Yeah.
Because they give you a false sense of security. Absolutely. So yeah. Anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on why tests are necessary. You have to remember that everything that we can do with our time takes the same currency, and that currency is our time. And so just think about how much of that currency you have to spend to automate some manual testing versus doing the manual testing or not testing at all and fixing the bugs as they come. And it's going to be different for everybody, but if we aren't thoughtful about it, then we'll probably make the wrong decision.
Well said.
Okay, cool. So yeah, and anybody can just go to my blog and search tests, and I've got so many. I'm not going to come back here. I'll just say go check out my blog. It's titled such and such, and you can go find it there.
Yep. TJ's been good about dropping them in the chat.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so we've got this decrement increment. Every time I see something that I want to test, I think, how would a manual tester test this? The entire or the best way to get a test that gives you confidence is by manually testing it, right? Like there's no better way to know whether it works than by checking that it works. But as we've established, that just doesn't scale. And so we take a step back from the way that the end user is going to use it by automating things. And we try to not throw out the baby with the bathwater, but we try to keep the core important parts of what the user is trying to accomplish by automating the tests. Yeah, I knew this was going to happen. I've got a plumber coming over. I knew they were going to wait until like I started this, but my wife's upstairs, so she should be able to take care of it.
They do wait outside until the stream starts.
Yeah. They're just like, I don't think you started recording yet, have you? Yeah. So there's this mantra from the testing library, and I probably should have come here first. Testing-library.com, and we have dark mode. I know a couple people mentioned that in the chat.
They're so excited about it, aren't they?
Yeah. So our guiding principle is the more your tests resemble the way your software is used, the more confidence they can give you. And that's a quote from me. I tweeted that a couple of years ago. And it holds water. Like I can't think of an exception to this rule. And so as we're moving away from the way that our software is used by not manually testing it, but automated testing, we're making a trade-off. That's what's happening is we're deciding, okay, so I'm going to take a small step away from the way that the software is used to make this practical for me. And we're constantly doing that when we're talking about testing, is we're saying, I'm going to trade off a little bit of confidence for practicality, for making this possible. So another good example of this is if you've got a store where you're selling cute koalas, and so you want to test the checkout flow, and you had a bug the other day where somebody added 1,000 koalas to their cart and they couldn't check out for some weird reason. So you write a test for that. If your test isn't mocking out the credit card processing, then you're going to have a lot of koalas and a big charge on your credit card. So for practicality reasons, we have to separate. In some situations, we have to separate what our test is doing from what the user would actually do, just to make it practical. Otherwise, you're going to run up a giant amount of credit card debt, and you'll own a ton of koalas. So,
which isn't a bad thing.
Yeah, that'd be fine if you could see what's in that closet back there. It's not koalas. So yeah, that's the idea. Is just like constantly keep in your mind, okay, so I'm not doing what the user's doing exactly, but I'm going to try and make sure I grasp the essence of what the user is trying to do to make sure that I get the confidence and I'm not losing that confidence. Because technically, when you mock out that credit card processor or whatever, if you ship to production, you actually don't know if that connection is going to work. You just don't. There's no way to really know. And so you do the best that you can by making the mock as similar to the real thing as possible. And then you just hope that that the credit card processing didn't change underneath you or something. And so far it works pretty well. I don't know of anybody who's actually charging credit cards on their tests. And Stripe has like test environments, but they're doing the mocking for you essentially. So like if you're using Stripe and you're saying, well, I don't have to worry about that. No, you're still mocking. It's still different from what the user is experiencing, but we do our best to make those work together. So that's a lot of talking. Let's just look at the code now. So here we want to make sure that our test increments and decrements when buttons are clicked. And so the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to show you what things look like without React Testing Library, and we'll bring React Testing Library in a little bit later, just so that you get a better idea. And I've got my test running over here. We'll just run this one test by itself. So, and I'm still waiting for that new MacBook to come out, hopefully next week. And then my computer will be fast when I'm sharing my screen, because I got this thing like a year and a half ago, and it's
Apple standards. That's ancient, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, this is what's more important is that we're a week away from when they're releasing a new product. So they make my computer go slower so that I'm excited about the new thing. I'm actually pretty sure that happens.
I think they got busted for it with the iPhone.
Yeah, I think they did. Yes. So anyway, if we're trying to simulate what is really happening, we've got this counter component. We can look at that. You should probably have a good idea of what that is. It's pretty simple. But we've got two users of our component. So when it's your app, you have one user of your app, and that's the end user. But when we're talking about a component, you've got two users. You have the end user who's going to be clicking on buttons, but you also have the developer user who's going to take your component and render it to the DOM. And so you need to keep both of these users in consideration when you're writing a test. And I have a blog post called "Avoid the Test User," which you can go look at and dive a little deeper into what that is. So what our developer user is going to do is they're going to say, okay, counter. We're going to create a React element for that counter component, and this is going to be our UI. Okay, and now we need to get that UI into the document. Well, we're running in a JS DOM environment right here, so we have document, we have body, and we want to just stick this UI into the document. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to have a container DOM node to render this UI into. So we're going to make a div. That's our document create element div. And then we need to put this into the body, because we don't just have like DOM nodes hanging out in memory for our users. Our users actually interact with DOM nodes that are in the body. So we're going to say document.body append div. You got to spell it right or it doesn't work. And now that we have a div that's in the body, now we can say React DOM render. Yep, there it is, spelling it right again. And we want to render this UI into that div. Okay, so now if we console log our document body .inner HTML, whoops, that's gonna not be happy. Here we go. Try that again. And man, I think actually what makes my computer slow is that I have 2 monitors and I'm screen sharing. Yeah.
I've been surprised by doing these how much the screen sharing and like the camera sharing can actually eat up a decent amount of resources.
Yeah. So I'm just really hoping that the MX silicon thing works nicely. So anyway, here's what our body looks like now. So we've got our containing div, and then our counter renders a div itself, and then it renders a div and 2 buttons. So we're getting all of that. This is exactly what we expect. We can even make some assertions here if we wanted to about the fact that it shows the counter and stuff like that. But what I want to do is I need to get a hold of these buttons so I can click those. And so the easiest way for me to do that is to, let's see, we'll say document query selector all, find all the buttons in here. And there are going to be 2. So let's just destructure both of those. We'll have decrement is the first one and increment is the second. And then let's also grab this div that has the message. So we can say message is div, and we could do all sorts of ways to get this. We could say first child and then first child again. So we'll get, this is the div that we're interacting with, first child, however you want to do that. React Testing Library makes this a lot better, and we'll talk about why this is kind of problematic in a little bit. But now I can make some insertions. So we can say our message, which is a DOM node, text content to be, and we expect it to be this current count of 0. And so we'll stick that in there. And then, we'll go ahead and save this while I'm going, and we'll multitask here a little bit. So then we'll say increment click. So we're going to click on the increment. Button DOM nodes have a click function that you can call, and that will trigger a click event. And so once we click, now the current count should be 1. And then we'll do the same thing with decrement. And now the current count should be 0 again. And that is our first very simple test. There are a lot of problems with this test, but this is the foundation upon which all of React Testing Library is built, is just the idea of our developer user renders some UI with React DOM into a div that's in the body. And then we interact with those DOM nodes as a regular user would. And that's the foundation of Testing Library.
Yeah, and I think I can see where you're going with this, because this test, like, while this is logical and makes total sense, like in a real world example, you're going to have all sorts of stuff you're going to need to render and query. And like, it's easy to see how this could get out of hand quite quickly, or at least for most.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for example, let's say that the product comes to you and they say, hey, our users think that decrement should go on the right for some reason. So you just move it over to the right. And for the end user, they're still looking for the increment and decrement. It doesn't make a difference. I see increment. Okay, that is what I click to make it go up, and this is what I click to make it go down. That makes total sense to me as a user. I'm not broken by the fact that that changed, but my test is broken because I was counting on the order of these 2 to be decrement first and increment second. And so, yeah, that's one thing that we would actually call an implementation detail. And so we're just relying on the fact that increment comes second and decrement's first. Another thing is the fact that the message is the first child of the containing div.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, so like there are several problems with this, and I realize that we only have a few minutes, and you wanted me to save some time for the chat. But yeah, that's the basic idea of Testing Library. So yeah, I guess since we need a little time for Q&A and stuff, do you want me to just to show you the code for what this would look like with Testing Library?
Yeah, I mean, whatever you think makes the most sense. If you want to dive straight into that so we have a little more time for QA, that's fine. If you want to walk through it, like, I'll leave it up to you, whatever you think is the most logical approach here with 15 minutes.
Yeah, I'll leave some time for questions. So, and I've got several other like little examples that I want to show. So from here, I'll just show examples, and Yeah, I'll show you the final version. Spoiler alert. Okay, here we go. All right, so this is the final version of what like how I would write a test if I had a component like this that I wanted to test. So here we're bringing in testing library React. We get render and screen. Render is how we get stuff onto the screen, and all render is doing is creating a DOM node and calling React DOM render for the UI you provide into that DOM node. So it's basically what we were doing. I mean, of course, it does several other things. There are options to hydrate, and you can pass your own container if you want to, and different stuff like that. You can also pass a wrapper. So if you wanted to test a context provider, which is the way that you should do it, then you can go about it that way. And then screen is for getting stuff off of the screen, for querying around the screen. And we have all of these queries that we give you so that you can get a lot of confidence about the elements that are being rendered. And so, for example, the most useful query and the one that you should be using most of the time is get by role. And this is referencing the accessibility role that is implicit most of the time. And so a button has an implicit role of button. But the cool thing about this is that I could swap this out for my own implementation of a button if I needed to for some weird reason, which there's never a good reason to do this. But if there was, then you could implement your own accessible button that's not a button element, and this test would still pass. So this gives you confidence that the screen readers and assistive technologies will be able to interact with your elements properly. So anyway, we are getting the button that has the accessible name of increment. And so this helps with like labels and different things like that. So one thing about React Testing Library is that there's a very strong focus on interacting with the DOM or querying around the DOM the same way that a screen reader does. Because we can't really do it visually like a seeing user does. That's just not very practical. But we can, like the DOM gives us APIs for interacting with it like a screen reader does. Those are the APIs that screen readers use. And so we use those same APIs. And so by using React Testing Library, you actually are giving yourself additional confidence that it should work better with assistive technologies, which is kind of really awesome.
Yeah, actually, I'll be totally honest. The first time I used testing library, I did look for like essentially a query selector all, right? Just because my brain is programmed to work that way. Mm-hmm. But after using the role-based approach, I felt like it was like restricting me, but like in a good way, if you know what I mean. Like, because my developer brain is like, oh, well, I know exactly how to get at that element, but like actually, it's like, well, but do I need to be doing that, right? Because all I really care about is to get the thing that's a button or get whatever the other role is, because that other stuff is kind of all just ceremony that doesn't matter for the purposes of my test.
Right, and in addition, if you're using query selector all, you're doing things that are implementation details, because most of the time you'll be querying by the class name is most common, or maybe the ID, and the end user doesn't care about that. They don't know anything about the class name or the ID or anything like that. And a change to that class name shouldn't break your test either. So yeah, that's a really important point. And I hesitate to show this, but render does return some stuff. And one of those things is a container. Also have to spell this right. But yeah, you can say container query selector, and you like that's just a DOM node. So you can do all of your regular stuff there. And in fact, because it goes into the body, which is in the document, you can actually also do document.query selector and all of that. And that will all still work too. But don't do it. This is much better. It gives you a lot more confidence. Yeah, and then we do have get by text for those, you just have your little message or something. But most of the time, you should be able to query by role. And we've got a bunch of others like get by value. And if it's not on the screen right away, then you can say find by, and you await, and that just returns a promise, and it'll just wait until that thing shows up, and then it'll continue your test. We've got tons and tons of utilities like that. Let's see. Yeah, I'll show another thing that people often ask about is async, and like testing async stuff. So I can't remember which exercise number this is, and my computer's just going so slow. Yeah, that one's probably not the best example. Here we go. So let's say you've got a login form that makes a request to actually go and log in. And so we have leaned in really heavily on MSW, which was, yeah, it's like a year old now or something like that. I discovered it as I was preparing Epic React. Yeah, and I just jumped all over it because it just makes it really, really easy to, relative. It's all relative, but it's really easy to mock out API calls. And so here we can create a server that mocks out a post to this API, and then we can give a mock response. And so we can render that login. We get our a username and password. This is called a test factory or test object factory. So it's just giving us a random username and password. If you want to learn more about that, testing JavaScript goes into detail on test object factories. And then we can use user event to type and click. So what user event does is it actually uses a utility that DOM testing library provides called fire event, which just fires individual events. User event combines all of those to fire all of the events that a user would typically fire when performing these actions. So when a user types, they don't just fire an on-change event on the input. They're actually firing a key down and a key up and a bunch of on-change events with every key that they type. And so this gets us even closer to what the user's actually doing. And so, yeah, user event type into the username field. We'll type the username, and we'll type the password. And then the user will click on the submit button. And then we just wait for the loading to go away. And once the loading's all gone, then we verify that the user's username's in the document or whatever else you want to do to verify that the user's logged in. Yeah, like before testing library and MSW, this test would be a disaster. It would be so difficult to test this sort of thing. But yeah, with these tools now, it's like asynchrony is not hard.
Yeah.
My kid just came in here. They're going on a trip and they're leaving soon. So he wanted one last hug. But if I asked him to read this and ask him what's going on, I bet he could do it. It's such a clean DSL that it describes exactly what's happening without cruft and pollution. So nice work on that.
Thanks.
No, yeah. I was actually going to say the same thing. So it's very readable.
I'm looking. Is he up today?
My kids are still an hour and a half away. They'll probably come in here as well, though, when they get here. That's their first instinct.
Dad life.
That's why I put up the barrier, right? Like this, they can't get through this.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, that's family life. We also have utilities for testing custom hooks and stuff too. Let's see, do we do that? Yeah, so there's a React hooks testing library that makes testing custom hooks a little easier as well. I don't recommend doing that a lot, but yeah, it can be pretty helpful for especially like libraries that expose custom hooks. I have a blog post about how to test custom hooks properly too. So, but yeah, there's lots more stuff in here. Seriously, epicreact.dev, or I should do a incognito window. There are articles on Epic React Dev too, if people want to take a look at that. Yeah, and testingjavascript.com, if people really want to dive deep into testing, there's a lot of really great stuff in here. And then Epic React is more than just testing. It's like tons and tons of stuff. So much stuff. It's crazy.
Very cool.
But yeah,
amazing.
I'm happy to answer any questions in the 6 minutes I've got left.
Yeah, so
I'm gonna go tell them bye. I'll catch you guys in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
See you, Dan.
So I just dropped the links in the chat if you want to check those out. So I know there's a couple questions that came in, so I'm going to scroll to get them, but I'll ask my one last question. I'm kind of curious for you, did you have a background in like DOM APIs that went into help writing this? Because I do have some background in the DOM, and I know like this stuff like event simulation and all of this can get fairly gnarly. So I'm curious if like you had some background with that helped you write and make this sort of thing possible.
Yeah, nothing like especially. There are a couple of things that are kind of weird, but for most of the accessibility stuff, like querying by role and stuff, that was actually done primarily by Sebastian. Sebastian's been awesome, and it's I'm actually no longer a maintainer on testing library. I jump in occasionally, but yeah, I just didn't have time for it, so I handed it off to a couple really awesome maintainers, and Sebastian's one of them. And Sebastian's a maintainer of the DOM accessibility API package, which testing library uses. For the events, it's actually not super tricky. Like, we've got this big map that just maps all of the different event functions that we have to these event types. And for user event to figure out what events are fired, I just made like a code sandbox. And I said, okay, so I want to simulate when a user types. So I went and I clicked on the input and I typed a character, and then I had pretty much all event or all the event types bound to this input, and had it log out which event fired. And so I could see what events happened when, and then I just made user event fire all of those events. It's not easy, but I don't think that there's a ton of DOM specific knowledge in here. This probably was the most tricky one that I made work, because React is weird with the way they do when you set the value of an input.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, like, it's all pretty much just regular JavaScript and fixing bugs as they come.
Yeah, it sounds like it's more like just putting a nice, like, clear API on it more than anything else.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So a couple other questions in the chat. AKD wants to know, do your components need roles? Like, I'm guessing he means like you need to explicitly assign a role.
You definitely do not want to do that. The only time you will ever use a role is if you are looking at the RES specification because you're building your own combo box or something like that. Do not just throw roles on elements willy-nilly. Yeah, totally don't. So you'll notice that when you bring up the dev tools and you select just like really anything, then you can come over here to the accessibility tab, which nobody sees because it's on the far right. They should move that. Can I move it?
Yeah, and you'll have to crank up the font size for other people to see this too.
So yeah, it's over here. This is kind of silly, but yeah, once you select an element, you can choose the accessibility tab, and this will show you the accessibility tree, and it shows the different properties, and you'll see that this has a role of heading. I don't have a role heading attribute. That's implied. It's an implicit role. And so, yeah, so in testing library, I could query for that. And another thing I should probably show is testing playground.com, which I did not build. This is Stephen. I can't pronounce his last name. He's awesome. But you can just stick your HTML in here and it will render it out. And then you just click on the thing that you want to select and it'll give you the query, the best query that you can use to select that, which is pretty rad. And then on top of that, there's a Chrome extension or a browser extension you can install. So you can have your app open and click on the thing that you want to interact with, and it'll tell you. And in testing library, you can actually, there's a utility on screen that's like log. Yeah, let's find it. It's come on.
Like to console log the thing you're looking for, more or less.
Well, so there's debug, which will log out the in a formatted and syntax highlighted form the HTML that is currently on the screen.
Yep.
But log testing playground URL will actually take that, serialize it into a small URL, and then you click on that and it opens up testing playground with your HTML in here already, and then you can just interact with it right there. So yeah, testing playground is a pretty useful feature. And you'll notice that I'm able to say get by role text box, but there's no role on here at all. That's just implicit. So yeah, don't just throw roles around willy-nilly. Don't do that.
We had two different people ask about testing library with React Native.
There is a React Native testing library. I don't do any native stuff, so you don't want me writing your testing library for that. But CallStack wrote a really great React Native testing library. So if you just look for native testing library, it should be the first result. For a while there, we had 2 versions of this library. But yeah, now we have one, and it's great. So yeah, give this a look. It's very, very similar to React DOM testing library or regular testing library. So if you like, I've had a lot of people say they went through testingjavascript.com, learned how to use DOM testing library and React testing library, and then they went to their React Native projects and were able to test things pretty well. There are just a couple of small differences.
And I think the last question I'll bring up is Dave wants to know, can this work with state management tools like Redux Toolkit? Any resources for working with that?
Let me find where I do that in here. Okay, yeah. So we've got right here. So there is a wrapper part of the API, which allows you to specify a component that wraps whatever you're testing. And so here we have a theme provider. This would be your Redux store provider. And so now I can say render with providers, easy button, and the easy button depends on that provider. We just render it with those providers like it is in the real app. And you get a lot more confidence. I know a lot of people, I don't want to call them out, but earlier Michael mentioned using the default value in context for testing purposes. I strongly advise against doing this and much rather recommend using the wrapper API in React Testing Library, because if your component depends on the context in the real world, then it should also do that in your tests. And so testing library actually shows you how to do this as well with React Router. And I actually think I do it with Redux as well. So
cool. And maybe the good thing to end up on is Big Ant Rod wants to know, is the code from the repo part of the course? Let's make sure, which link was it to get at the code for this workshop again? Was that the GitHub one?
It is testing React apps. Testing React apps. Yeah, it's just on my GitHub.
Yep. Okay. I got the link, so I'll drop that in there. It's the last thing if you want to check out that code. Well, Ken, man, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this. I'm amazed that you're still going. You need a bio break or something.
TJ hasn't stopped yet, so I don't know what's happening over there, but he has.
It's all right, man. I've got some like water bottles down here. Like, right, we're totally good to go.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for doing this. It's been fun.
Yeah, right, thanks for joining us.
See ya.
See ya.